Hello, good day or good evening wherever you are. Irini Hara streaming from Oslo, Norway, with the first episode of my new podcast, Autism on 360 Degrees. I myself, I'm a mother of a kid with the ISD diagnosis or on the neurodivergent spectrum. And I also am an educator. And this is one of the main reasons for which I chose to open up this platform on YouTube and invite people that in a certain way they relate or live with autism in daily life or work with autism and so on to share their stories. And today I have Ann Iren Glimsdal. Welcome, Ann.
Thank you.
I'm going to introduce her briefly and then I will let her speak a little bit about herself too. So Ann Iren Glimsdal is an ABM NeuroMovement practitioner who lives between the mountains and fjords of Sunnmøre and who is on a lifelong journey to understand the human potential for learning and adapting. Trained as an engineer and working internationally as a project manager, she questioned what would help people realize and apply their resources for the benefit of both themselves and projects they were involved in. Her own health challenges led her to exploring various movement and awareness practices. She has since then been teaching yoga, work with children with special needs, and is now a healthy and thriving licensed practitioner of the Untitled method NeuroMovement, a learning method that supports the brain's own ability to organize movement, thinking, and cognition. She teaches this gentle method of learning and thriving to individuals and groups of all ages, diversities, and abilities. So welcome again. And
Thank you.
yes, I would like you to also speak a little bit about you beyond what I already shared.
I may. Yeah, when I look back at my, how to say it, if career or my changes in career, because there have been quite big changes in what I have chosen to do in life. For a long time, I was self-critical to all these changes and thinking that I was doing so many different things that I should make up my mind. But now, after learning the ABM NeuroMovement method, I'm seeing and learning that learning itself is a creative and chaotic process. And that sometimes, and now after in retrospect, it looks like there's a red lining in it. That I have always been very curious about the human beings and learning, and very, very sure of that no matter what challenges or limitations we have, we are not our limitation and challenges. It's more, it's easy to believe ourselves more limited than what we are. And having had the chance to change so dramatically from being in the engineering world into going into the yoga world to work with kids with special needs, I think has given me so many learning opportunities and so many opportunities to see that the perspective we take on life actually impacts our thinking and our way of talking and being and how we interact with others.
Yes.
And in particular ABM NeuroMovement that we will speak more of on this episode, which it's not a type of therapy, but it's a learning method.
Yes.
A method that works on stimulating the brain itself to do its job better. Because if we have a stronger, better brain, we can also interact better in the world, learn new things, and understand ourselves better.
Yes.
Yeah.
I would like to add something because you spoke about this continuous learning process and the way we perceive and we actually approach also our own processes throughout life. Because many of these ways, to call it like that, they come also from conditioning. And many of them, they come from parents, from family, from the bringing environment we have at school and later or at work. And I think it has a lot to do with trauma. And this is a topic that, of course, we're not going to go there today, but it's a topic very close to me because I've studied a specific trauma therapy method, and I read a lot about it. And there are many authors nowadays speaking that also trauma, and especially early childhood trauma, is one source of disruption in our development and creating difficulties, as it happens also for the people on the spectrum. So it makes all sense that you actually said this. You started to speak about this method, neuromovement. Would you like to detail a little bit and explain us what actually means and how you work?
It's a movement-based method. So Anat Baniel, who is the woman behind the method, she was learning from Moshe Feldenkrais, a somatic experiences method, or what, I'm not sure what he called himself, but it's related to movement and our ability to sense and feel ourselves. Because we learn our experiences, we learn from based on what we feel and sense. And normally, if you're healthy, if you haven't had any brain injuries as a child, your learning switch is constantly on, and you learn to know the world based on how you move through the world, or how you lift your hand and you feel the sense of gravity, and how you interact with the world. And if you think a bit widely about movement, thinking and emotions are also forms of movements. So Anat, she says, because she connected this feeling and sensing to the brain, because she understood that it's the brain that organizes our thinking, our emotions, our movement. And she calls movement as the language of the brain. And by using movements, you can sort of communicate to the brain in a way. Either it's movement that you as an adult do yourself based on my verbal instructions, or it is me drawing attention to your movements by doing some gently touches as you move, or help you move a little bit. So what I do when I work with people, if I work one-on-one, it's a combination of instructing, or like giving some words, or highlighting to a person one movement versus another, or like the sensation of one movement versus the other, so that the brain can take learning from it. Or I ask a person to do a certain thing and feel like listen to something, not feel a certain thing, because there's not a right or wrong thing to feel. But in order for the brain to be able to learn something, it first needs to experience or perceive the difference between the two things. So if, for instance, I can't perceive the difference between two colors, there is no difference for me in my world. If I can't perceive two lines and I'm asked to write between two lines, that will be a tough job for me. So first, there needs to be a perception of a difference before the brain can take that as information to move on to the next level. So as we move, as you see children move, they first move very clunky. When they first come up to standing, it's very unbalanced. It's almost like an accident. It's a play with gravity. And it's quite chunky, the movement. They're not very refined, the movements of a little child. But then gradually, by experiencing more and more and sensing more and feeling more, the movements become more and more refined. And parallel to that, there's a similar process going on in the brain about thinking, because the brain organizes both the movement and the thinking. So the better we are at perceiving differences, the better we are at learning. And the better the brain can do its job. And the job of the brain is to make order of the disorder and make sense of the nonsense. And that's probably why this method has been applied with people on the spectrum. My teacher, Anat Baniel, she talks about it. She says that there is she thinks of it more as a movement challenge than anything else. And she says they can see it, and there's research also showing that from an early stage, the child is not moving as refinedly, and therefore also not able to take useful information from the experiences they are having. Or
Yes.
they take them, or they organize it in a certain way, but it's maybe not how you would organize it. They make their own sense of it. And sometimes it can be just since there is not a perception of differences, the information coming in is more like a soup.
Yes, and they need to
Yeah.
organize the support, pick up
Yeah.
what is not tasty, right?
He has a little story on that. I don't remember when she told it, but she says, imagine that you put yourself into a blender, a
Yes.
smoothie, and inside this one, you're trying to see what's going on outside the glass of the blender, but it's all covered up. It's all smushy, and you can't really see what it is. But then maybe with some facilitation, you can maybe start wiping off of the glass, and you can start maybe perceiving a little bit more of what's going on the outside, and then maybe then when that information coming into you is when you're able to perceive differences in it, then you can easier make it to learning, and you can gradually build on to that.
And she speaks about these 9 essentials that she actually wrote books about it, that are the core principles of this method. Would you like to speak briefly about them?
Yeah, I may. So how it started with 9 essentials, she has a lot of information about this on her website, but I can briefly take you through at least the most easiest to apply. So these essentials are 9 conditions or principles where it's easier for the brain to learn, or like facilitates learning, the 9 essentials. So the first one is called movement with attention. And this is also backed by science, that if you bring your attention to the sense of self and how you feel as you move, the brain lights up. Then you can get more information to the brain, and it gives you more learning. If you're just on autopilot, which we are as adults, at least a whole lot of the time, it's efficient in order to do the job, but we're not learning a new thing. And when you want to move forward into like progressing in a certain field or whatever it is, there needs to be new learning. We can't just repeat the whole same thing over and over again. So movement with attention is the first principle. And that also helps you build your ability to perceive, because you're actually applying your attention to yourself and your sense of self. The second one is slow. So fast, you can only do what you already know, she says. So it's a bit more like we can also reference that to autopilot. Like we do something fast when we have learned it, and it's very useful. We need this skill. But if you want to groove in something new in your brain or do something new, you have to go slowly. Because if you go slowly, you give your brain a chance to perceive more differences. You give more nuances into the brain. So if you slow down, and I can notice now I'm even slowing down my talking, because every time I talk about this, I can remind myself that I also tend to go slow, because when you have a lot you want to share, it's easy to speed up. But if you want to learn something new, go slowly. And you can, listeners to the podcast or yourself, you can try it with your arm. If you stand and you just lift your arm up really fast, the only thing I can perceive from this is maybe like there's a quick pull in my shoulder. There's a lot of effort, but I don't get a lot of useful information or input to my brain about it. But if I lift my arm really slowly, I can feel that now I'm sitting. I can feel there's a weight shifting going on, leaning myself over that way. I can feel that my arm is rotating as it goes up. I can even feel like temperatures of the air. I can feel there's so much more information to pick out from this for my brain than if I do it quickly. So that's number 2. And then number 3, which I think is very relevant for people working with children on the spectrum, it's variation. Because you need variation in order to perceive differences. If you keep doing the same over and over again, there's not a chance of changing. You can't perceive more changes. And it's quite typical when interacting with children in school or kindergarten with children on the spectrum that they do things in a certain way because they see maybe the child is calmer when when the child gets to know upfront what is going to happen throughout the day. So it can seem that this is what helps the child. But more than anything, it helps maybe the people running the daycare center.
It's easier for them to do
It's
this.
easier for them, yes. And to maybe to some sense to the child, it's easier because there is predictability. But if you want the child to be able to shift out of the rigidity, there needs to be variation.
Yes.
But it needs to be variation where the child still feels safe. So Anat would never ask someone, or in this method, we're never asking a child or adult to do things they cannot do. You find out where they are, and then you expand from there little by little. So it's still safe, but you introduce variations to the theme that maybe there's one theme they're really interested in, then you're adding variations, but you do it at a speed where the brain can keep up and it can expand and learn.
Yes.
And then another very important one is subtle. So, um, so when you move, rather than doing one big movement with a lot of effort, do a subtle movement, and it can be small, because the intensity itself, the same way I lifted my arm, like this, it has so much intensity that the intensity itself steals away what I'm able to feel. So if I do it very slow, I do it small and subtle. I don't even have to do it all the way. It can be just really tiny because the organization of the movement happens in the brain, happens before you do the actual movement. So by going subtle, you open up for the brain to take more information because the intensity is not so, doesn't draw all your attention to the intensity itself.
Slow and subtle.
Slow and subtle, they are two good words. And these essentials are also the way we as practitioners work when we interact with someone. So I need to be comfortable enough when I touch someone to help them feel themselves. So I have to be subtle in my movements, and I have to go slowly with my movements for them to feel what subtle and slow is, because a lot of people don't. Even healthy adults don't know how really slow can be, or how subtle can we actually be.
We are paced for the fast, not for the slow in our life.
Exactly. We are grown up in a system where we think more is better. Yes. So it's like this mechanical principle, or like if you apply more force, you think you get more outcome. So that's the physics, and it's that we apply to mechanical systems. But our brain is not a mechanical system.
Neither our body.
Yeah, it's not. We are not. Yeah, we are whole being, and we have a brain that operates more similar to an information system than a mechanical system. So less is more in this method.
I see.
And then you have enthusiasm.
Oh.
So, which is sometimes we might think that enthusiasm is like, oh, hooray, you did such a good job. We're gonna like positive reinforce what the child is doing by saying, you're so good, you're so good. But this is not what Anat Baniel means about enthusiasm. But enthusiasm is a really important ability that we can train to give value to what we find important. So if I feel really happy about something I managed, and I decide to be enthusiastic about it, I give this more space in my brain. And it will then be easier for my brain to groove in this new way of doing things. And if we talk about it in relationship to how we are together with a child, our children are much more sensitive than we might give them credit for, even if they're not on the spectrum or they are on the spectrum. So we as adults around the child, if we see a small change in the child that we like, we don't necessarily have to say, oh, you did so good, but just take delight in it and make it big for yourself in your own brain, because people around us can sense when we are happy for them or not. People can always sense what people around them feel to one degree or another. If somebody looks at us with skeptical eyes or think there's something wrong with us, we sense that we are not good enough or we've done something wrong.
Yes.
They don't have to say it. And if we look at someone with enthusiasm and delight when we see they do something, it has the same opposite effect, or effect
But
to the other way.
I can confirm for autistic children, because my son is extremely sensitive to my states and moods, and he feels so quickly. So sometimes I actually need to self-regulate and be mindful about what I present to him. And when I'm not, I can see that I can stress him just by him not understanding why I feel my own stress, you know. So
Mm,
I think it makes all sense to
yeah.
actually invest in learning how to be enthusiastic.
Yeah. It's definitely something it's a joyful thing to practice because you give space to what is good. And when you focus on what is good, there's less space for what you see is limiting or challenging, and your mind is drawn towards those things. Your perspective shifts towards what is good. And I think for anyone, no matter how challenged, there's a lot more good to that person than just the challenge. So it's a
Exactly.
bit of like shifting perspective in a way. And I also have learned that it's not the eyes that see, it's our brain that sees. So it's what we expect to see is what we see. So I noticed this when I worked in the kindergarten, and there are children when I have, I have a part-time job in a kindergarten. That's where I started this work because I met a girl who was practicing this method. And I also have worked with some children on the spectrum. And sometimes I feel like they see my intentions. It's not so concrete in a way, but how I look at them really affect how they interact with me. And so there's I think Anat said this, or someone else. I think Anat. She said like we don't learn as separate brains. We learn in a community of brains. Everything around us impacts us, and we have to make sense of it in one form or another to ourselves. But we are not separated individuals. We are a part of a community of people, and we learn in a community of people. So
We have
other people.
a whole lineage also behind us that transmits
Mm,
things, even those that we don't want. So it's a really complex reality.
yeah. So what I really like about, because I think that to some extent all people have some kind of trauma, and trauma has become a very popular. It was also when I was teaching yoga, there was trauma sensitive yoga, and there is trauma, of course, to a lot of people, but there is also this remarkable opportunity for the brain to change the future trajectory, because we cannot change what happened in the past,
Exactly.
and we are not fixing ourselves or anything. We're always going to carry our history, but we have the opportunity to change our perspectives and look forward. And that's what I really like about this method, that it's like, okay, we have, no matter what limitations we have, we still have an intelligent system between our ears that can take us further and can give us new learning and let new learning and new future things become a bigger part of us, making that thing that maybe has been limiting us for a long time less important in a daily basis. It's always going to be there because it's our history, but there is this approach. Uh, since it's not a therapy, it's not about fixing anything. So it's not about fixing a trauma, but it's to look forward and
But
yeah. And
therapy
I
doesn't aim
also
to fix anyone anyway. Therapy is just, at least the method I've studied, is even known as self-meeting method. It's just a
yeah.
way to understand yourself and to understand what you carry, and then find
Mm,
pathways through rewiring. Because what we
yeah.
actually speak about is how you create new pathways, new opportunities,
Mm. Yeah.
opening the new ways of being, retraining yourself through
Yeah.
the brain.
Mm. So there are many similarities. You see similarities in this. Yeah. It's nice. I think there are lots of different methods and they're called different things, but I think there's some commonalities in a lot of things we do. And I really like that I feel there is a shift towards thinking of our of beings, of all beings, as complex dynamic systems
Yes,
with
evolutionary
ability to
systems,
change.
how
Yeah.
we evolve through
And
time.
yeah. And whole beings where everything is interrelated.
Yes.
Um, so that's a good approach, a good development, I think.
Yeah, I think it's the right one for the times we live in. You spoke
Yeah.
about the experience you had in kindergarten with kids that are on the spectrum or have some special needs. Would you
Mm.
like to tell us a short story about something that really impacted you, something that really told you, yes, I did well to learn this matter. I'm so happy. I really made a difference in the life of someone.
Mm. Yeah. Um, well, I started working in a kindergarten part-time to have a base income when I was a yoga teacher. Because being a yoga teacher is not a easy living
Yes.
if you don't
For
like
sure.
being on social media or yeah, I'm not very keen on putting pictures of myself out there and doing all that marketing. So I decided to have a part-time job next to it. And I knew already that my health is dependent on movement. This is why I started yoga. I felt like what it was doing to me, this inward looking and moving and meditation. So I thought, okay, in a kindergarten, I can move throughout the day. They are outside, they're inside. It's could be a suitable part-time job. And because I was very interested in movement, they asked me to work with some children with special needs. The idea was to do that in a way that all these type of sessions these children needed to have shouldn't steal from them or their opportunity to also socially interact with the rest of the group. Because often you have to take the child out of the setting with other children to have one session of therapy with a physio and one session with the occupational therapist, and then yeah, language and or what they call them in English, they logoped, yeah, speech
But
training.
this was in America, not here.
No, this was in Norway.
In Norway. Oh,
It
okay.
was in Norway, and yeah, so I was coordinating this, and then I just one of the kids I worked with after a while, she went away for like a week, and she came back, and then she had shifted so much. She had these jump in her development. And so I started getting really curious, like what's going on? And I asked the parents, and they told me about the Anat method, neuromovement,
Hmm.
and I read what I could read about it, and I got very fascinated. And then I asked if I could come along. So I actually traveled with them to Denmark to join one of these intensives that this girl participated in. By watching it, I just felt instantly that I needed to learn it because there was something that really resonated in me somehow. And then with a lot of help of friends and family and by selling a lot of things, I went to US to do the training in 2019. Started off, it was a very intense training because you are required to increase your own ability to sense and feel. Because you need to sense and feel yourself well and become aware of your own thinking and before you can work with others.
Exactly.
And especially very sensitive children. So the basic training of an method is a 1.5 to 2 year training that is now, after COVID, become more online, but is also in-person segments, 10 segments. And then after you've done those 10 segments, you have gone through a lot of movement lessons for yourself. And then you start learning to work with children. So I graduated in 2022 to work with adults. And I worked with people who had back surgery. I worked with people who had stiffness and not without any diagnose, people with ADHD, people with aches and pains. And then in 2024, this year actually, I graduated from Children Mastery, she called her, which is like a continued education program to give you license to work with children with special needs, which has been super interesting. So I've practiced with children before I got my license, as we do for the training. And now I'm offering lessons here in Ålesund and in my home in Barsavik and on travels in other towns.
Yes.
And recently on a retreat in Mallorca, which was a lovely place to be.
Actually, we met at the airport before we went there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I just would like to mention now the fact that I'm planning to some session with you in December for the winter holiday. We come to Ålesund, to close to your place, and my son will have sessions with you. So maybe we can actually have a second interview, an episode later on next year, where we can speak about the sessions and how are the positive developments after them, because I'm really hopeful that there will be positive developments. Of course, we cannot do a lot now, but continuously, if we train the brain, that's what we train the brain, right? Through movements, I'm quite positive about the method, even only reading about it.
I think also that because the more you're exposed to this method, the more question arises. So it's a path of forever learning in a way. It's like the more you know, the more you understand you don't know, and you have questions, new questions. So I think coming here and being exposed to it will also give you other questions and ideas, and maybe other associations with what you are doing, and you also have a strong how I've experienced you. You have a strong desire to share everything you learned. So I think it's absolutely a good
Yes,
idea
I'm
move
always
on.
I'm trying to always open my mind more and more, and that's why I chose the title, the 360-degree perspectives, because I understand that we live in a very colorful world, and our brain is already very colorful and neuro diverse reality. So it's important to understand, but also because I truly believe that all these conditions, let's call them like that, some people like labels like syndromes or diagnose or whatever, ISD or Tourette, ADHD, and so on. I don't like labels because I think they are really limiting, and they create limiting beliefs in people and limiting perception of what actually is the reality, which is very complex. But what I'm curious is to explore those methods or those approaches that can open ourselves to a new reality and to a new possibility. And that's why I got very curious and interested about an Advanian method when I read in a book. Actually, it was a book about reframing autism, and it was speaking about polyvagal theory. And in the book, the author gave the examples of Feldenkrais method and other methods, among which also the NeuroMovement. And I went to explore then further on YouTube, and this is how I got to you. Because then I said there might be a practitioner somewhere close by, maybe Norway. It's curious enough that it's not in all countries that you have practitioners. I went to see on the website of Anat Vaniel, the Romania, which is my native country, and there is none there. So we are lucky actually to have you and another practitioner. There are the only two for the moment in Norway. So maybe one day we can bring the training to Europe or even to Norway. We will figure it out. For the moment, we are, let's say, trying to put some basic bricks to a wall of knowledge that can expand into maybe a building or something else that gives more opportunities to more people too. Now that we spoke about YouTube and websites, would you like to also suggest some resources? Because I went on YouTube, for example, and there are so many resources, and some of them are really tailored for autistic children or for kids with other, let's call them, disabilities. And I actually even subscribed for an online course that was already pre-recorded and has 15 sessions. I didn't get through all sessions, I just started. But what it catch my attention also was that the first session was really very practical. Of course, it was an introduction, and then a lot of exercises. It was like I was doing yoga, but they felt to my body so difficult, so difficult. And then I said, okay, she knows what she's doing. She tries to explain us what degree of difficulty many people that have some difficulty experiencing just doing simple movements or simple connections between parts of the body. And I was like, this is brilliant. She's brilliant. And she's a very good teacher also, you know.
Mm.
So, but would you recommend other resources, even written or videos or courses? Because if people get to know about this and they understand the advantages and the progress this method can bring in the well-being, but also in the degree of functioning of those people that are, they are limited to a certain extent in their way of functioning, then for sure people will want to know more and to go and search as I did. And maybe
Yeah.
you can share some of this. Of course, I will
Yeah.
share them after also on the episode description, but you
Mm.
can also address a little bit this here.
Yeah. So Anat Baniel's website, there is a lot. You have seen that one. There is so much information on it. But if you come to it where your basic interest for it is related to autism, you can choose that on the list of, yeah, if you go on for children, and it's listed.
Oops, we lost her a little bit.
During
I lost you just 1 minute, maybe because of the
okay.
connection. So if you're saying something, you will need to repeat.
Okay. So on the website of Anat Baniel,
Yes.
you can find a separate one related to autism if you
Yes.
go on for children.
Yes.
And if you scroll down, you see testimonials from parents who have had children using the method. But there's also a link to an interview that was done during a conference on autism. It was in 2016, where I think Anat describes quite well how she relates to autism in her work. Because she has worked with a lot of children on the spectrum, and some of them have, a lot of them, if not all, are functioning better, start seeing the world differently, and gradually, some of them have even lost the diagnosis.
Exactly. Which
So
is
it's quite
really
remarkable. So
amazing.
I think that's a free resource to use. Then, of course, she also sells her program. That could be interesting because I think learning about it through reading is one thing, but learning it through
It's
sensing
experience.
like you did is
Yes.
even better.
Yes.
So, because then you meet yourself and you have to apply the essentials. You have to do less. If you feel the pain, go less. If you feel limitations, maybe do it in your imaginations. It's very valuable to learn with the whole self and not just your academic mind.
Yes.
And yeah, so yeah, a lot of resources on Nat's YouTube channel. And
And there is also a book or several books, if I'm not wrong.
yes, sorry, yeah, of course I should mention. There's two books. There's one called Move into Life. That's the first one she wrote, and it's targeting adults with aches and pains and people who want to move better and feel better. And then her most famous book is The Kids Beyond Limits, which takes you through the essentials with lots of cases and explanations on how you can work with your own child. So you can, to be a practitioner, you need to go through this long training, but there's a lot you can do at home. And there's a lot of learning in this book, Kids Beyond
Yes,
Limits.
there are shorter courses that explain basics, and
Mm,
it's easy to follow them as the
yeah.
one that I purchased. Yes, and
They
it's not
have,
high cost either. I think this
no.
one with 15 lessons costed around $50 or something.
Yeah, okay.
I find it quite affordable for every
Mm,
parent, even those that have lower incomes.
mm. So there's one more I'd like to mention because she has a really brilliant course that she started after COVID. It's called From Fixing to Connecting.
Yes.
It's particularly aimed at parents and caretakers of children with special needs. And in this one, you go through the essentials, or I think it lasts for 10 weeks, but you have access to the course much longer. And you get the chance to ask questions.
Because they are live sessions.
Some.
Some of them, yeah.
Mm-mm.
Good. So for those interested, go and search Anat Baniel website and purchase the book also because it gives you a good background. And we are almost closer to an end. But before this, I would like you to tell us, as you mentioned, this importance of parents also understanding and supporting their kids when the kids have these difficulties or they have this label of the diagnosis. What would be your personal recommendation based on your own experience with kids? And because when you work, you have to work with the family. It's not that you work only with the kid. And this is actually one perspective that I'm very fond of and comes from my experience with also family or systemic constellations, because we are all part of a system. And even when the disruption or the difficulty comes in a family member, those difficulties sometimes is somehow to a certain extent belong to the system, not only to that person. And all systems should be involved, but at least those that are closer to that person or to that kid. So what kind of advice or recommendation will you give to the parents that would like either to approach the method or to just support more their kids if they find out these difficulties? And they, because I know that many are overwhelmed when a kid gets a diagnosis, any kind of diagnosis, you are overwhelmed. I was in denial for a long time that my kid is somehow out of the normal, another level, normal, what is normal. But anyway, and it took me years, because it took me first, I needed to reconnect with myself and to understand, to process all the things inside and the confusion. So yes, my brain was in a soup when we got the diagnosis, because I got it too for him. And it's only recently that I feel that I acquire a full understanding of the complexity of the situation. And recently when I started to access more methods and more information. So it's a process. It doesn't come like someone doesn't give you the solution or the recipe on a silver plate. So what will be your advice for parents?
Yeah, one thing is to see it as a process, as you say,
Yeah,
and to realize that it is a trauma for the parents.
it is. I can confirm it was for me. I got the diagnosis too.
Yeah,
I'm
and
not fully sure.
and then we tend to like because you love this child so much, you want to do everything to help this child, and it's very easy that it ends up. Sorry, I'm a bit I had a bit of a cold. That the project that the child ends up being a project
Yes,
needs to be fixed,
a full time.
a full-time project, and all children are full-time projects in one sense.
Yes,
But I think to give yourself a little bit slack as a parent and to work with yourself to
it is.
process what you have gone through,
Yeah.
and also to look what the child is going to and what is their felt experience. Because sometimes we take we are sometimes we really want to fix the problem. We sort of think of it as a problem that we need to fix, and this fixing mentality can get in the way of thinking a bit more widely on how to approach it. So that's why Anat, before the Nine Shells, so she talks about to going from fixing to connecting, and that's also the title of that 10-week course that I mentioned. So if we start with ourselves, like in all meditation practices as well, we cannot go out and change the world. We cannot control what other people will learn. We cannot. We can only facilitate and create an environment around the child. And the biggest part of the environment for the child is the parents.
Yes.
So if the parents take give themselves a little bit more slack and time to themselves for them to process what they have gone through or are going through, so that they are not so overwhelmed and that they come to a place where they can feel a bit more calm, because then they can see everything in a different light and or with different eyes.
Yes.
So some practitioners that I know, I think it was quite clever, rather than just investing money in the child in order to help the child, invest also in yourself. So she actually demands the parents to have one lesson before she gives lessons to the child.
Yes.
Partially because she wants the parent to understand what the child will be learning. And I think that was a brilliant thing. And I would recommend that too. If you want to test out neuromovement for your child, test it for yourself first.
Yes,
So
that's
you
why I bought the
understand.
course because I said I need to
Yeah.
understand this in practice. It's one way to read it, as you said, and one way
Mm,
to practice on yourself. So
mm.
I will do my homework. Don't worry. Before I come to Olesund, you will have
I
someone who
think
already at least tried some of these
I
exercises.
think you're already quite well ahead in the process. And life
Yes,
is a
I
process,
believe
right?
so. But you know, it took me 10 years to arrive to this level, and the first investment I did was in myself. A lot of
Yeah.
hours. I When I tell people, I don't have a car because all the money that was supposed to buy a car went into therapy and self-development and self-connection tools and courses and trainings. So it's a matter of prioritization to find
Exactly. And
myself.
that's a value that adds. If you buy a car, the value goes down.
Yes,
I think it's
exactly.
a very good investment.
Yes, so we are now almost close to finish, and I'm very happy that you agreed to have this interview with me, and you brought so much interesting and important information. For sure, we will do another one a little bit later next year, too, after we went through sessions with my son. And I don't know if you want to have a kind of final remark or share before we actually close this episode.
Mm. Just to encourage people to continue being curious about
Yes,
themselves
themselves.
and
Yes.
about themselves in relation to others. I think that's a wonderful thing to do. And look with those enthusiastic eyes, like look for the good stuff.
Yes.
That's what's
Change the
brilliant.
perspective into positive and see the
Mm,
bright side of
mm,
reality even in most difficult moments. This is something you can train. You train the
mm.
brain actually to do this. Thank you so much, Ann Glimsdal. It was a pleasure and an honor to have you today as a guest. We spoke about you as individual, but also as professional, as practitioner of this Untitled NeuroMovement method. And I'm going to place the interview on the YouTube channel and the podcast with also contact data. So if anyone interested in Norway or close by want to connect with you and try this method, this information will be available in the description of the episode. And I hope that many of you will follow also this episode and the next ones that will come. I promise you interesting approaches that will make you curious and that will probably, to a certain extent, start to change your mindset, way of living, way of doing, maybe even your whole being and the well-being of your kids or parents that are in this autism or neurodivergent spectrum. Thank you so much and see you next.
Really.
Bye bye. Bye, Iren. Thank you.